Welcome to the Send Talk podcast. It's where we get straight to the point to answer the most common questions we get asked here at SENDIASS Manchester. And joining me for this episode is Laura Nardella, an advisor at SENDIASS Manchester.
Thank you, Vic. Hi, I'm Laura, and just to let you know, for more information about everything we're going to talk about on this episode, simply head to the SENDIASS website, which is sendiassmanchester.org.
So, Laura, what are we going to be covering in this episode?
Well, today we're going to be talking about what you can do to enforce your child's education healthcare plan. And in particular, we're going to be talking about Section F of the plan.
So who's this episode for?
So this episode is for you if your child has an EHC plan, but you're just concerned they're not receiving the right provision in school. Perhaps things used to be in place and then there were changes and you're thinking, should that be happening? Or you're not sure. Or perhaps things are going wrong and you're thinking, hang on a minute, my child's got an EHC plan. It should be clear that they should get support for their needs. So why isn't this happening? And perhaps you've had several chats to the school about a few points here and there. Maybe there hasn't been changes or progress. And you're basically in the situation going, I'm not really sure what I should be doing. You're looking for advice. How do I move things forward?
Sounds super useful. So what are we going to be covering then?
Well, in this episode, we're going to be talking about four things. Well, three and a half. The first thing is, what's Section F? Okay, you need to know, you really need to understand what Section F. We're going to do a brief overview, but that is really important. The second part is going to be the law around Section F. That's going to be brief as well. There's just one bit of law, but again, it's going to be really important. You need to understand this if you're going to know how to enforce your plan. Section 3 is going to be about what steps you can take going forward, depending on the circumstances you find yourself in. And joined up with the third bit is we're going to cover why it's really important for Section F to be specific. So we're going to delve into a little bit of that as well.
Let's get cracking then. Let's start at the very beginning. Point 1, what's Section F?
So when you're thinking, my child has a plan, but they're not getting what they need in school, the what they need in school bit, if you will, that's Section F that you're talking about. So Section F of the EHC plan contains the special educational provision that your child or young person requires in order to meet the special educational needs which are set out in Section B of the plan. Now, that sounds maybe a little bit confusing.
So this episode's all about Section F, but go on, tell us what Section B is.
Section B describes the special educational needs of the child or young person. So an example of this might be to say Laura has a significant visual impairment in both eyes. So that's a description of my need. Section B should describe all the child's special educational needs. So that would include cognitive needs. So that's about learning, communication needs, anything around physical needs, medical needs, social interaction, sensory, social, emotional, mental health, etc. So that's basically what Section B covers. Then in Section F, you have a description of what provision has to be in place to meet those needs from Section B. So it's kind of like two sides of the same coin. There is a need and then there is a provision to meet that need.
So let's use that example again, Laura. What would provision look like there?
So in the example of Laura, who's got a visual impairment, the provision in Section F of her plan might state that one, she requires an iPad in school to work on so that she can increase the sizing of the text. It could be that she also needs work on paper to be printed in a particular large type so that she can use it and read it. And it might also say that she needs to sit at the front of the classroom so that she can hear the teacher clearly without getting distractions. So that's the provision that will meet her needs and it will allow her to learn and progress and access education. And that's a really simple, straightforward example, but that's essentially what it is. Effectively, Section F describes what will be put in place in school, college for your child to ensure their needs are met so they can learn and progress. And Section F could include information on what support, it could be resources, it could be about interventions, about reasonable adjustments, equipment, like in the example, it could be about staff training or more.
So who decides on that provision then?
Well, you remember the EHC plan is informed by professional reports. So EP schools, health professionals like speech and language therapy, etc. They will have written assessment reports as part of the EHC process, and those reports will have included recommendations on what provision needs to be put in place. So when the plan is written up, the provisions from the reports are used in section F, but we'll come back to that later when we're looking at what you can do to enforce your plan.
Everything seems pretty clear to now. So there's law, isn't there, around this section F?
Yeah, so section F is legally enforceable. And the legal duty for this is set out in section 42.2 of the Children and Families Act 2014. So I'm going to read it out. It's just one sentence. So in section 42, when it talks about EHC plans, the second point in that states, the local authority must secure the specified special educational provision for the child or young person. So as you can see, the legal responsibility to deliver the special educational provision in section F lies with the local authority. And it is an absolute legal duty. So you can see that from the word must. It isn't guidance or something that can be decided on dependent on something else. It is a must duty.
But in practice, what happens?
Okay, it's their legal duty, but you will know if your child's got an EHC plan, the local authority provides education budget, education funding, and that gets given to the school. And it's really the school or the college who will be doing what it says in section F. But what's really important when you come to enforcing that is to understand that whilst the school or college are the one doing it, the legal responsibility for that rests with the local authority.
I was wondering why you mentioned the law, but it is really useful and helpful to know that the law exists and gives more options to then enforce the plan.
Exactly. It's also really important to know that as part of that legal duty, which I mentioned before, is that the local authority needs to make sure that the allocated funding is overall enough to secure that provision.
What does that mean?
It means that it's the local authority's legal duty to make sure the schools, etc., have the correct financial resources, training, etc., to deliver what it actually says in section F. Some extra points to take from this time from case law. The local authority's legal responsibility starts from the date the plan is issued, so it's not later. So if your plan is issued on a day, it isn't that they can say, right, okay, we're going to start our legal responsibility in 6 months from now when we find a school. No, case law says it starts from the moment the plan is issued. Another point from case law, the local authority cannot pass that legal responsibility on to another service. What does that mean? It means that they can't say, well, we gave that legal responsibility to that service, they didn't do it, so it's their fault. It always comes back to the local authority, okay? It's always their legal responsibility. Another last bit of case law is that they have the responsibility to deliver the special educational provision exactly as it's described in section F and not something else. So they can't say, okay, it says this in section F, but we're giving something kind of like that. And that's actually really important. We'll come back to that later when we discuss specificity. So I'm hoping that's made sense. It's a very quick overview of the law around section F. The main thing you need to know is about section 42.2, that it rests with the local authority. And if you want to go back on some of the other things I said, you can always read up more about it. And we will add some links in the show notes to pages which delve a little bit deeper into that.
So we've covered what section F and the law relates to. Now let's move on to what parents can do if they think something is going wrong.
Excellent. So the first step would always be to check your child's plan. Why is that? So you think things aren't going right in school, but the question is, what does it actually say in section F? That sounds really obvious, but at SENDIASS, we often get parents ringing up and saying, you know, the schools are doing what they should be doing. And then we say, okay, what does it say on the plan? And they may not know. You always have to go back to what it says in section F. So I'm going to give an example of that. You're concerned because your child used to have one-to-one teaching assistants supporting all day, but this has been changed to mornings only. Check section F. You might find that it doesn't mention one-to-one support all day. So despite whether it was happening, if it isn't in section F, that makes it very difficult to challenge or enforce. So it's not about what you think they should be getting or perhaps what they were getting. At the end of the day, it's about what is in the EHC plan.
All right, then I've checked my plan. What's next?
Speak to the school. Find out what is actually being delivered. This might sound really obvious as well. And I know a lot of parents will say, well, I have spoken to the school, obviously, quite a few times. But I would say think about it in a slightly different way. Have a meeting with the SENCO about the special educational provision you have questions about. Okay, so Vic, let's say you've got your child's EHC plan and you kind of looked at section F, you're highlighting sections and you're thinking, well, this is what it says in the plan. I don't think this isn't happening. This isn't happening. Go with the plan, write down your questions, take these to the SENCO.
Give me an example then of how that might work.
Okay, so let's say it says on your plan, your child's plan, that Sarah requires 15 minutes of sensory circuits daily. Okay, you can look at that and think, well, I don't think that's happening. Ask the SENCO, are they happening? When are they happening? So who's supporting her? What class is she missing whilst they're happening? Does she enjoy it? Go in. You're basically going information gathering. Okay, and what's the point of this? Quite often I've found out that when this happens, parents are actually really surprised at what support and provision is actually being delivered. Perhaps they didn't know about it. It's absolutely fine if you don't know about it. You're not actually physically in school. So before you go forward and say this provision isn't happening, check the plan, find out what the provision is, and then go to the school and say, okay, what's happening, what's not happening. And part of that, if your child is able to chat to you about it, speak to your child, they can share their experiences. And you can write those down and take that information into the meeting. So an example, perhaps the child should be getting a weekly mentoring session every Friday. And they've told you that it hasn't happened for like 3 months. Take that information into the meeting with the SENCO and you can raise that.
So I've checked my plan. I've had a meeting with the school. What happens if our listener finds out there is provision that's listed in section F and it's just not happening?
So you've done all your information gathering. You know it's not taking place. You've raised your concerns with the SENCO. What's the next step forward? Raise this with the local authority. Knowing that there is a legal duty around section F and that it rests with the local authority allows you to challenge this from an informed position.
How would you even go about raising this with a local authority?
Well, SENDIASS have template letters that you can use to alert the local authority that there is a breach to their legal duty under section 42.2. So in that template letter, you can specify, there's a space where you can specify the special educational provision or many provisions if there's quite a few multiple things that aren't taking place. So there's a place in the letter where you can write down what is happening for your particular circumstance. And when you're filling that in, I advise that you use the language that's actually written in the education healthcare plan. So, for example, quote the provision as it's listed in section F, and then next to it, you can state what the current situation is. And you may also want to mention what information you've gathered from the school or the fact that you've spoken to school about it, so you are sure that that isn't taking place. But Vic, this takes me to the problem then that often comes up when you get to this point, which is that section F often isn't specific enough to easily allow this to happen.
So specificity.
Yes, you love that word.
Yeah, I cannot never say it. Specificity. Being specific is something we've mentioned in so many of our Send Talk episodes. So let's dive into specificity.
I just bring it up to get you to say it again. Right. Section F. Section F should state the special educational provision clearly, and it should be specified and quantified. And what does that mean? It means that when you read it, you should know what they're getting, how often, for how long, how will it be facilitated, all that kind of information. This is stated in the Code of Practice, and it also is backed up by case law. And the thing that you need to take away from the case law is that the judge said that basically the provision should be so specific and clear as to leave no room for doubt. So anyone reading it should have a very clear understanding of what that provision is.
I think it'd be really helpful, Laura, if you give us an example of specified and quantified special educational provision.
Okay, so an example might say, a teaching assistant will deliver 30 minutes of phonics and sounds literacy work 1-to-1 daily, 5 days a week. So anyone reading that will pretty much know what's going to happen.
That is very specific. But what actually happens in practice?
Well, in practice, what happens is that quite often Section F can be quite vague. It can sound fine, but it will be full of what are called weasel words. And these are words that don't actually mean much. So for the purposes of this exercise, when you're trying to enforce your EHC plan, those weasel words will make it really hard to challenge and to enforce the plan.
I think we've mentioned weasel words before, but give us some examples.
Okay. So things like access to or opportunities for, regular, may benefit from. So let's use our last example. Okay, let's say you got your plan back for your child, Vic, and it said, Laura must have regular access to phonics and sounds literacy work with one-to-one support. So sounds the same, right?
Yeah,
sounds good. You're thinking, okay.
Yeah, that sounds like something I pop on a form.
One-to-one phonics and sound literacy work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sounds like she's getting what she should be getting. But let's say I'm not getting that, or let's say it's happening once a week, or maybe just once a month. Technically, that is access to. Once a month is technically regular. But is that enough? Is that really in the spirit of what should have been happening when it was written? And the main thing for this episode is, how do you enforce that? Let's go back to the case law I mentioned earlier, which said that the local authority's duty is to secure exactly the provision which is stated in the plan. And in section 42.2, it also says the specified special educational provision. So the specified word, it again relates back to what is actually written in the plan. So that was written with a view to say, okay, it's written in the plan, you have to do what's in the plan. And that's what's going to be delivered. So that's good. But the flip side is, if section F is vague, if it says access to phonics, then it really becomes very difficult to challenge or enforce it.
I think that's a really good tip when you're looking at section F, because you've got to think, that's the question in the back of your head. You've got to ask yourself, how do you enforce that? And the more specific it is and the more clear section F is, it's easy to enforce. But what should parents do if they read their child's plan and find section F isn't very specific in the first place?
Right, the first thing to check would be go back to the professional reports. Perhaps the professional reports are really specific, but you found that's not actually been translated into the plan. So perhaps when writing the plan, bits have been left off that are actually in the reports. If that's the case for you, bring that up at your next annual review meeting. Take the reports and ask for amendments to be made to section F of the plan. So it should be quite straightforward because you've got the professional reports that have been used to write the plan, and you can say this bit has been left off and I want that amended. I want that included in section F.
I'm going to get really granular here. I think it's worth mentioning. What if the reports themselves aren't very specific?
Well, that's a really good question, because actually I would say most of the time that's actually what the issue is. And it's not even that they're not specific. They can be specific to a degree, but they're just not quantified at that level, in terms of hours instead of times. So it'll say what the child needs, but it isn't really quantified. If that is the case, you can ask for the professional to go back and perhaps write up the recommendations to be more specific and more quantified. SENDIASS does have a template letter that you can use to write to professionals and ask them to do this. And don't forget also that the school is technically a professional as well. They will feed into the review process. So you can request that the school's recommended provision be more specific too. I've just got one tip whilst we're talking about the school now. Make sure that everything that the school is currently doing right now for your child, which your child obviously needs, that's why they're doing it, make sure that it actually appears in section F, because that's not always the case.
Why wouldn't it be there?
Schools often put in support that's not in section F because schools are really responsive. You've got an annual review meeting every year, but the child has changes, throughout the school year, and the schools will put things in place. So let's say, I'm going to give you an example. I think it's just a lot easier to sort of work through an example. Let's say the child's developing some anxiety around coming in the morning, and they put in a provision for the child to be met at reception every morning by a member of staff to support them to attend their form, and perhaps they do a little 5-minute chat at the same time just to get the child, ready for school. And this is going brilliantly well, but then suddenly it stops because staff isn't available, and then the child is having difficulties. The parent's going, hang on a minute, it was working and now it's gone. My child needs this, but that isn't special education provision that's in the plan. So it isn't enforceable. So keep that in mind as well. So I'd recommend at every annual review meeting, have a good talk with the school about what provision is currently in place. If they're doing it, it's because it needs to be done. But on your side as a parent, just keep track of it. And if it's not in section F, then ask for it to be put into section F. If it's something that needs to happen, it needs to be reflected in section F of the plan.
So what are some of the other issues that parents are facing?
So the main thing is being told that there's a lack of funding. Don't forget that in law, it states that part of the legal responsibility on the local authority is that the funding should be enough overall to secure the special education provision detailed in section F. So what I mean by that is, for it to happen, there should be enough money for it to happen.
What can parents say, Laura, when this conundrum comes up about funding?
If it's an issue, then you can speak to the school for the school to raise it with the education healthcare plan about any funding gaps. Essentially, it's not for the parents to sort out funding or to deal with that. Your focus as a parent is to ensure that the detail of what is described in section F is correct.
The next stage, then, what can parents do if section F is vague or unclear so they can't enforce it?
So you've gone through all the other bits about the reports and maybe that's not worked out. You've got your plan and section F is vague, as you said. You'll want to make changes to the plan. So how do you make changes to the plan? 2 ways of doing this. I'm sure you already know. Go to annual review. That's how you change plans. Have the plan there. Be prepared to go through sections F, which you feel could be amended. The second way is to appeal to the SEND tribunal. You can appeal section F, and often sections B and F are appealed together. We won't go into that right now, but if you are within your appeal window, you can lodge an appeal to the changes that you feel need to be made to the contents of the plan. So basically, if you want to make changes to section F. SENDIASS has a tribunal guide to section B and F appeals, which really goes into it in a lot of detail and gives guidance on the process.
And we'll link that guide in the show notes. So I can also assume if you're in this situation and you want to go to appeal, you can always contact us at SENDIASS for more information.
That's right. So if you're not sure if you're within your appeal window, you can speak to us, or you can also listen to our SEND Talk episode, First Steps to the SEND Tribunal, which does go through that as well. But you can always contact SENDIASS as well, so we can talk through your situation.
It's been a juicy episode full of lots of information. Really helpful stuff though, Laura. Really, really helpful stuff. Can you give us a roundup then of what's the advice you've given?
Yeah. We'll go through what we've done today. You feel your child isn't getting the right support they need in school. First step, check your child's plan. What is written there? Number 2, speak to school about it. Information gather. What are they actually doing and what are they actually not doing? If there is provision that is not being delivered, raise it with the local authority, use the template letters if you need them. And if you find out that Section F is not specific or things are missed off, request amendments to the plan, either through annual review, and then the final stop would be lodge an appeal to the SEND Tribunal.
What are your key takeaways then for parents listening to this episode?
Well, the main thing is that I'm hoping that they really understand Section F, what it means, that it's a legal duty, and that will encourage them to read their child's EHC plan, engage with the plan, and really engage with the annual review process, and raise awareness that it's not just getting a plan that will, solve their problems, deliver what they need. It's important to really look at what is in the plan.
And if you don't have a copy of your child's latest plan,
you can always ask the EHCP team to email a copy to you, or ask the school. They probably have a copy they can share. If you don't know who your EHCP coordinator is, contact SENDIASS and we can direct you to the coordinator, which is linked to your child's school or college.
Brilliant stuff. So just to clarify, to access SENDIASS Manchester, you must be a Manchester City Council resident. But there is a SENDIASS in every local authority in England, and you can find yours by doing a quick internet search of SENDIASS and your local authority name.
Brilliant. Thanks, Vic.
Thanks, Laura. So that's it for this episode. Thank you for listening.
And thank you from me as well. Do you have a question for us that you'd like us to answer on future episodes of the SEND Talk podcast? We'd really, really love to hear from you. Send your question along with your name to the Manchester SENDIASS email, which is sendiass@manchester.gov.uk. And we've included all our contact details in the show notes as well.
Thank you. See ya.
See you. Bye.